Good evening, everyone. How are y'all?
It's great to see so many out tonight with us. And before we get going, I wanted to just say that how thankful I am for the ministry team that I get to be a part of and work with. Chad did such a wonderful job this morning. I really appreciated the lesson that he gave, and I really appreciate working with Chris McCurley and all the good stuff that he does, that he makes me better at what I do. So I'm thankful for Chris Hedge. I'm thankful for Steve. It's just a really great team. So, tonight we want to talk about conquerors. We want to talk about being conquerors. And I want to first start with a story about having faith like Nepali breaks. So this picture that you can see here, this is in the Annapurna region of Nepal. This is on the way up to a lake called Sekong Lake, which is at 8,900 feet. And this is one of the better roads in the area. And the gentleman, when we were there this past November, this was toward the end of our trip, and the gentleman that was with us said, "Hey, there's this really cool lake. Would you like to go see it?" We said, "Yeah, that sounds great." He said, "Well, jump in the back of this pickup truck." So we were like, "Okay." So we load in the back of this pickup truck, and he heads off down the road, and it was paved at first, I should say that, and then we got to this. And he drove on what you see here, the same way you drive going down I-40 into Nashville. So we're going way too fast. We're taking these hairpin turns, it's actually switchbacks, way too fast. And he would be, on the way up, it was nerve-wracking enough. On the way down, the faith this guy had in the brakes on that poor little truck, it was remarkable. We were going wide open, it felt like, down this road, and we would get to one of those switchbacks, and he would jam those brakes, and we could see everything that was left in the country down below us, and we would somehow come to a slow enough speed that we could get around that switchback into the next one. And there was another gentleman, Jonathan De Jesus, that was with us, and he grabbed my arm one time, and he said, "I thought that was the one." And I said, "Yeah, me too." He said, "There's got to be some kind of lesson we can use in this somewhere, because they have some serious faith in these brakes." So tonight, I want us to think about how strong our faith is and what our lives say about that, what our lives say about, as far as an expression of our faith, how strong our faith is, how strong our faith is in God, how strong our faith is in our congregation, in each other. Just want to think about that a little bit. Tonight we're going to look at, we're going to look at 2 Samuel in chapter 23. If you want to turn there, I'll give you a little bit of time. Here we're going to look at the account of Benaiah, who was one of the mighty warriors of King David. Now, you may have heard that name before, and you may have even looked at this little small snippet of scripture before. He's mentioned briefly here, and he's mentioned only a couple more times in the scriptures. But man, he plays a powerful role in a lot of what takes place in the scriptures, and he's a really strong example of courage and putting faith into action. So we're going to start 2 Samuel 23. We're going to start in verse 20. And Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, was a valiant man of Kabzeel, a doer of great deeds. He struck down 2 Ariels of Moab. He also went down and struck down a lion in a pit on a day when snow had fallen. And he struck down an Egyptian, a handsome man. The Egyptian had a spear in his hand, but Benaiah went down to him with a staff and snatched the spear out of the Egyptian's hand and killed him with his own spear. These things did Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, and won a name beside the mighty 3. He was renowned among the 30, but he did not attain to the 3. And David set him over his bodyguard. So for a second, let's look at who was Benaiah. I could not get that out, sorry. Let's see what we know about him. Well, he was a mighty warrior of King David. There were 3 really mighty warriors of King David, and they really stretched themselves on thinking of a creative name here. They called them the 3. So the 3, they were recognized by David as superior warriors. The first one was Josheb-Basshebeth. That's a fun one to say. Josheb raised his spear against 800 men. The scripture says he raised his spear and killed 800 men at once. Scholars looking at that don't think that was in one fell swoop, but rather in battle, in one time. He went against 800 men and was victorious. The second was Eleazar. He stood his ground against Philistines when others fled, and he was victorious. And this is where we hear the account of his hand freezing to his sword, that he fought so strongly and for so long that his muscles seized that he could not release his sword. And the third was Shammah. Shammah also took a stand in a field of lentils against the Philistines as others fled. Benaiah was part of the 30. So there's the 3, and then there's a group of 30 warriors that are also part of King David's mighty men. Benaiah was the second in the 30. He led mercenary forces for David. He was appointed to the bodyguard, to David's bodyguard, and he eventually became to serve in rotational leadership in the army and then taking Joab's position over the army. We also know that Benaiah was the son of Jehoiada, who was a chief priest. He was from the tribe of Levi, so we can assume that Benaiah was very familiar with worship practices, with faith. He was also a descendant of Aaron, the high priest, first high priest. And he was from a town near the border of Edom, which was called Kabzeel. In present day, that's southwestern Jordan. So let's look for a moment at what Benaiah did. So the scripture says first, he struck down 2 Ariels of Moab. Then it says he faced a lion. And then he struck down an Egyptian. When we look at 1 Chronicles chapter 11, there is an account of this same thing again. This starts in 1 Chronicles 11 verse 22. So in verse 22 it says, "And Benaiah the son of Jehoiada was a valiant man of Kabzeel, a doer of great deeds. He struck down 2 heroes of Moab. He also went down and struck down a lion in a pit on a day when snow had fallen, and he struck down an Egyptian, a man of great stature, 5 cubits tall. The Egyptian had in his hand a spear like a weaver's beam. But Benaiah went down to him with a staff and snatched the spear out of the Egyptian's hand and killed him with his own spear. These things did Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, and won a name beside the 3 mighty men. He was renowned among the 30, but he did not attain to the 3, and David set him over his bodyguard." The heroes of Moab, the Ariels of Moab, there have been some differing thought on what that means. Does that mean there were 2 sons that were of Moab? Does it mean that these were lions, literal lions, but very large? Or does it mean that they are lion-hearted warriors of Moab? And most scholars tend to believe the last part of it, that they were lion-hearted warriors of Moab. And Benaiah faced them and took them down. I want to skip over the lion in the pit and look at the Egyptian that he fought. This was an Egyptian that was 5 cubits tall. That's approximately 7.5 feet. That's real tall. Chris Hedge is tall. That's taller than Chris Hedge. 7.5 feet, this Egyptian. And he has what they refer to as a spear that is the size of a weaver's beam. So in a loom, there's a rod that goes across the top. That's the weaver's beam. And it was known for being very sturdy and very stout. And the spear that he carried was the size of this beam. And I think it's interesting that Benaiah goes down to him and faces him and snatches his own spear the size of a weaver's beam from a 7.5-foot warrior and then turns it upon him. There's got to be some kind of courage there that's pretty awesome to step into that moment, to face someone of that size. He faced an unimaginable challenge, though, when he faced this lion. So some people say this could have been a cave, it could have been a cistern, but the point is, this pit, but the point is, there is a pit with a lion inside it, and this man walks willingly, actively into a pit with a lion, on top of it being snow on the ground, a day when his footing was not what it could have been on a dry day. His senses may have been off. It's cold. But he actively walks into this pit with a lion, knowing that there's disadvantage to him, and he comes out victorious. Imagine the fear, the uncertainty. There's just sheer danger in that moment. But he did not shrink, and he faced the lion head on. There's courage seen here in adversity. Benaiah is facing a challenge that most would cower before. But his bravery teaches us to confront fears, even in the most daunting circumstances. That life throws lions at us. Doubt, fear, challenges, hardships, trials. But God equips us to face them courageously. And it's important to understand that not everything that we may hold fear for is a negative moment. Not everything that we hold fear for may be this big dramatic moment. It could be fear of stepping into a new job. It could be fear of having a conversation with someone that we really care about and we're concerned about. Fear can be all over the place. But God equips us when we rest in Him to face those moments and to overcome that fear. Benaiah shows us faith in action. His faith was not passive. He didn't wait for the lion to attack. He took decisive action. Snow on the ground, it may have given the lion away because he could see his tracks, but he knew where that challenge was and he went after it. It's very important that our faith is active. It's very important that we trust God and that we move forward in His strength. And notice that it's in His strength. It's not in ours, it's in His. And Benaiah shows us incredible trust in God's power. We're not told directly about Benaiah's faith, but we have a whole lot of context that tells us he had strong faith, and that he knew where God was, and that he knew who God was, and that was where his faith was based. It seems that his actions pointed to that belief that victory came from God's hand, that it came from a trust in God and not his own. So we can look at some passages, or we can look at the passages and we can pull some things out that say, this trust for what he was doing, or this action rather toward what he was doing when he was facing this Egyptian, when he was going into this pit, when he was doing these things that take remarkable courage, that it wasn't because he had a death wish, it wasn't because he just was oblivious to things that might happen to him and harm him, but rather because he had a trust in God, that he knew he could walk into a moment that was uncomfortable and unsure and that frightened him, and that God would equip him to walk through that moment. We see in his background that Benaiah was the son of Jehoiada, who was a priest. He grew up in a priestly family, which that likely meant that he was well acquainted with those worship practices that we spoke of earlier. That had to have shaped his character and values. He also, his role and loyalty says a lot. Benaiah served King David loyally, and David was a king known for his deep faith. Serving such a king, especially in the positions to which he was appointed, would involve a commitment to those same values and principles, we believe. And his actions, those exploits, the things that he did, including the lion, demonstrate just remarkable courage. Such courage often comes from a deep-seated trust in God. In Israel's warrior culture, this was especially so, where it was emphasized reliance on God for victory. as seen in stories like David and Gideon and others. And then there's Benaiah's leadership. David, who was a man after God's own heart, he trusted Benaiah with significant responsibilities. That included commanding his bodyguard and eventually leading the army. There was a trust from David that would suggest Benaiah was a man of integrity, that he was a man of character, and again, that he likely shared those same principles of faith in God. And as we consider this in our own battles, in our own lions in the pit, our hope rests in leaning on the Almighty, knowing that His power is made perfect in our weakest, 2 Corinthians 12:9. So what does this mean? What is Benaiah's life? These few short verses, what does it tell us? It tells us that we can confront our lions. It tells us that we can identify those lions. We can identify those fears and those doubts and those challenges. We can identify that discomfort. We can identify those gaps in life where it feels like something's missing. And we can know that if we are seeking God in true, genuine nature, that if we're truly building a relationship with God, that those fears can be overcome and that those holes, those gaps that feel like something's missing can be filled. We have to engage those challenges in faith. But again, not just the challenges. We have to actively engage opportunities as well. And those can be can bring fear as well. We want to step out in faith. What courageous step is God calling you to take today? Benaiah stepped out in faith in some big ways. Think about your own life. What is God calling you to step out in faith toward today? Is it something big? Is it something small? Is it something private at home? Is it something involving work? What's God calling you to step out and trust Him that He's going to carry you through today? Trust that provision. Trust His provision. Trust His guidance. And embrace God's strength. Recognize that victory is found in God alone. That's where it is. That's the end of that. That's the end of that story. Hard stop. Victory is in God alone. Surrender those battles to Him. Witness His power at work in your life. When we seek His guidance, when we seek a relationship that puts Christ and that example at the front of everything, when we are pushing toward heaven, toward God, life starts to look different. And the challenges, the battles, they start to be easily overcome. So this is my purple cow. When we think about Benaiah, again in those few short verses, he was a remarkable man. He did remarkable things. He was given remarkable responsibility. I have a friend that I grew up with in Louisiana, and my best friend growing up, and we were talking, it's been a few years ago now, we were on the phone, and he said, man, he was telling me about a conversation he had with somebody. He said, man, I was having a conversation with this guy the other day, and he threw out this just crazy story, and I want to tell you about it because I think it makes sense. And I was like, okay. He said, have you ever seen a purple cow? It's like, I don't think I have. That's a weird question. No, I haven't seen a purple cow. He said, but if you did, would you tell somebody about that? I'd probably, yeah, because that would stand out that there's a purple cow wherever it might be. And he said, that's remarkable, right? I said, it is. He said, what about us as Christians? Are we doing things that are remarkable? I said, whoa, I don't know. He said, well, are we purple cows? Or do people drive down the road and do they go, yeah, there's a field full of cows, but it's the same cows we always see. There's nothing wrong with them. Everything's good. But then look at that one. There's a purple. That is remarkable. I've got to go tell people about this purple cow that I've seen. So I get what you're saying, man. That our lives need to express this remarkable faith, that our lives need to be this expression of love and compassion and grace and mercy, pushing toward telling everyone that we can reach about the gospel, about the goodness of salvation, and not in a way that's just, we're another field of cows, but instead, we're that purple cow that's remarkable. And when people look at us, when people look at you, when people look at me, they say, man, there's something different there. It's not just another cow in a field. There's something remarkable about the faith there. So as we wrap up, thinking about Benaiah's legacy here, his example shows us to embrace courage and act in faith and rely on God's unfailing love. But remember, when we face our own lions on those snowy days, when we're walking to the face of that pit, where the challenge waits, God is with us. He's there. He's always there. And He will empower us, and He will help us overcome. We always want to make a time and a space available. If there is something that we can pray with you about, if there's something that we can encourage you on, we always want to make that space available. If there's something that we can celebrate with you, we always want to make that space available. And we don't want that only to be after moments like this on Sunday morning or Sunday evening, but any time that you might need something from this congregation, we want that to be open for you. If you're here tonight and you've obeyed the gospel, you've been baptized, and you're at a place where you say, I need to do something different still. We want to pray with you. We want to be beside you. We want to walk along with you. But if you've not obeyed the gospel, there's no reason to wait. No reason to wait. And if you're here tonight and you want to obey the gospel, or if you're here tonight and you want to speak with one of us, with one of the ministers or the elders or anyone in this room, we want to do that with you. We want to make that available to you at all times. But tonight, right now, if there's something specific that we can do for you, that we can pray with you about, we want to make that available to you now as we sing.